The clock above the bench read 9:47 on Monday, the 5th of October, 2026. The Caledonia County Courthouse was full. Wesley Crane stood at the defense table in a faded blue flannel shirt, his calloused hands resting flat on the wood. The back doors opened. 3 young women walked in. Lila led, a 4-inch Harvard Law file folder against her chest. Marin and Junie followed. Lila crossed the bar, set her credentials on the defense table, and spoke clearly. Your Honor, defense counsel for Mr. Crane. Doyle, Doyle, and Doyle. Judge Eleanor Vance looked up from the bench. Wesley did not turn around. The courtroom held its breath. 9 weeks earlier, on the 15th of August, a county sheriff's deputy had walked into Cedar Hollow Elementary at the end of Wesley's afternoon shift. The children had already gone home. The hallway smelled of pine cleaner and warm radiators. Marjorie Tilden, principal of 22 years, stood near the trophy case with her hands pressed flat against her skirt to keep them from shaking. The deputy was apologetic. He had a manila envelope. Wesley took it without expression. He read the cover sheet, signed the receipt of service on the deputy's clipboard, and went back to mopping the corridor. The complaint alleged that between 2009 and 2014, Wesley A. Crane had unlawfully withdrawn $312,000 from the guardianship trust account established for the 3 Doyle sisters. The plaintiff was the Caledonia Children's Trust Foundation. The signatory on the petition was Gerald Holloway. Wesley. Marg's voice was thin. You need to call a lawyer. He did not turn. The mop made a slow figure 8 on the linoleum. She watched him for a moment more. Then she walked back to her office, closed the door, and sat down at her desk without turning on the light. On the corner of her blotter was the small framed photograph she had kept there for over a decade. Hannah Doyle, in cap and gown, 21 years old, standing on the front steps of the University of Vermont. Marg had hooded her at the ceremony herself. She picked the frame up, set it down, and pressed her palm flat over the glass. That evening, in the rented house on Birch Street, Wesley sat at the kitchen table and looked at the small pile of mail. There was an unopened letter from Lila, postmarked from Cambridge, Massachusetts. He did not call her. He set the letter back on the stack and went to bed. The next morning he opened the school at 6:15, as he always did. A 4th grader caught him in the hallway, breathless. Mr. Crane, the water fountain in our class is broken again. He smiled and lifted his toolbox. He had lived alone since 2024, when Junie left for Middlebury. Every Sunday, he still baked a tray of oatmeal cookies and stacked them in a tin in the refrigerator. Nobody came by to take them anymore. He ate 2 with coffee on Wednesdays and threw the rest out on Saturdays. In the back of his mind, when he thought about it at all, was a single image from November of 2009, the funeral home in Burlington. 3 little girls in matching Navy dresses Marg had bought from the Salvation Army the day before. Lila, 7, holding the other 2 by the hand. Marin, 5, refusing to let go of a stuffed rabbit. Junie, 3, climbing into Wesley's lap during the service and falling asleep against his sternum. After the casket had been lowered, he had carried her out of the cemetery still asleep, with Lila and Marin walking on either side of him, gripping his coat. He had not put her down until they reached the truck. That same week, at the Maple Diner on the corner of Birch and Pine, the conversation drifted toward the new judge. She had moved up from Burlington 3 years earlier, after a divorce nobody discussed. She was rumored to be unbendable. Last Tuesday, she had refused a continuance for the mayor's son on a DUI. Tessa, the waitress, refilled 3 coffees and said nothing. On Wednesday morning, Marg slid into the booth across from Wesley. She set a small white envelope on the table between them. I can't say anything until November. You know that. He folded the envelope into the inside pocket of his jacket without looking at it. He stirred his coffee. After the breakfast rush, he walked back across the schoolyard. Maple leaves were turning. He stopped in front of the 3 old swings on the far side of the playground, where Lila and Marin and Junie had once swung side by side every afternoon for a whole year after Hannah died. Behind him, a black Lexus eased past the front gate, slowed, and drove on. In Boston, on the 23rd of August, Lila sat in a small reading room at the Federal Records Office. She had filed the FOIA request 14 months earlier, The clerk handed her a sealed envelope and a sign-out sheet. She sat for a moment before opening it. Inside were partially redacted personnel records for Special Agent Wesley A. Crane, badge number 4471, Boston Field Office, Public Corruption Unit, 2007 through 2009. Lead investigator on United States v. Holloway Caledonia Trust. Case number 09CR3318. Status: investigation suspended in November of 2009, following the death of the principal cooperating witness, Hannah Doyle. Lila did not move for 20 minutes. For 17 years, she had known him as the man who fixed the washer and made oatmeal cookies and walked her to her first day of high school. He had never said the word FBI. He had never said the word agent. He had never said Holloway. She closed her eyes for a moment, and a memory surfaced from December of 2009. The small house on Birch Street. She had been 7. She had come down for water in the night and seen him kneeling in front of the fireplace, feeding a thin black wallet into the flames. A piece of metal had glinted before the heat took it. "What is that, Uncle Wes?" He had turned without standing. His face was very calm. "Nothing, kiddo, go back to bed." In the reading room, she opened her phone and called Marin. "I need every wire transfer in and out of Caledonia Children's Trust between 2006 and 2009. All of it. Now." 3 days later, on the 26th of August, she stood at his front gate. He was hammering a board back onto the porch rail. He looked up and did not seem surprised. "How long have you known?" he asked. 3 days. He set the hammer on the step. "Come inside. I'll put coffee on." In the kitchen, the fluorescent over the sink hummed. He poured 2 mugs. She placed the file between them on the table. He looked at the first page, where Hannah's name was printed in plain federal type. It was the first time in 17 years he had seen her name on official paper. He did not cry. He laid his palm flat on the page, very gently, and left it there. "I didn't want you in this," he said. "You have your own life now. My life is because you didn't disappear. You know that." He looked out the window above the sink. The light was turning gold over the back fence. He did not speak for a while. When he did, his voice was almost too low to hear. "She was supposed to testify on a Tuesday. She died on a Saturday. The Bureau told me to stay in Boston, that the case was theirs, that I should let them do their job. By the time I got to Burlington, you 3 were sitting in a hallway at Child Services, and a woman with a clipboard was asking what your last names were. I never made it back to Boston after that." Lila did not interrupt. She watched him. He had not told her any of this before. "Dad," she said. The word stopped him. She had never used it before. "Let us defend you." He did not answer. After a long moment, he reached across the table and squeezed her hand once and let go. That same evening, in her chambers, Eleanor Vance opened the case file on Caledonia Trust versus Crane. She paused at the plaintiff's name, Holloway. She had read the name once, years ago, in a clipping her property law professor had circulated as a cautionary example, something about a state senator and a charity, something that had been quietly dropped. She underlined the name in pencil and set the file aside. The pretrial hearing was scheduled for the 8th of September. Wesley wore the same flannel and a clean pair of work boots. Lila wore charcoal. Holloway entered with Vincent Brackett, a Boston attorney whose hourly rate was discussed in admiring tones at the Caledonia County Bar. Brackett wore a gray 3-piece suit. Holloway wore a Patek Philippe and a small, knowing smile. Brackett moved first. He filed a motion to disqualify defense counsel on grounds of conflict of interest. Miss Doyle, he argued, had been raised by the defendant. She could not represent him objectively. Lila stood without raising her voice. "Your Honor, Vermont Bar Rule 1.7 permits representation when the client provides written informed consent. Defense submits 4 notarized waivers, signed by Mr. Crane and by all 3 sisters." She handed the documents up. Eleanor read each one carefully. She set them down in a neat stack. "Motion denied. Counsel may proceed." Eleanor turned toward the defense table. "Mr. Crane, do you understand your right to substitute counsel at any time during these proceedings?" Wesley stood. His voice was even. "Yes, Your Honor." Their eyes met across the courtroom for 2 seconds. Eleanor noticed, against her training, an unusual stillness in him. It was not the stillness of guilt. She made a small notation in the margin of her docket and moved on. Brackett presented the prosecution's evidence package. 47 bank transactions from the Doyle guardianship account, 2009 through 2014, totaling $312,400. Photographs of the Ford F-150 Wesley had purchased in 2010 for $4,200. Receipts for $8,000 in home repairs. A spreadsheet showing $186,000 in tuition payments to Sacred Heart Academy across 9 years. Lila did not interrupt. She let him finish. Then she stood. Defense requests 60 days of discovery to prepare countervailing evidence. 45, Eleanor said. Trial set for the 5th of October. Court is adjourned. In the hallway afterward, Holloway crossed Wesley's path and shouldered him on the way to the doors. He leaned in close enough that no one else heard. Wesley, 17 years. I almost forgot you remembered how to wear a jacket. Wesley said nothing. His jaw did not move. Lila stepped between them with her file in her arms and held Holloway's eyes for the first time. He smiled and walked on. In the parking lot, Junie was waiting beside Wesley's truck. She did not speak. She put both arms around his ribs and held on. Have you had coffee, Dad? Not yet. Maple Diner. My treat. He laughed once, quietly, and opened the passenger door for her. In the diner, she ordered him a short stack with butter on the side, the way Hannah used to order it for him when she was alive, although Junie did not know that. He watched her order across the counter, and a small pull went through his chest that he did not name. When the plates came, he ate 2 pancakes and pushed the rest toward her. She ate them without asking why. They sat in the booth for half an hour without saying much. The light through the front window was the color of weak tea. When she dropped him off at the schoolyard at 5 o'clock, he stood in the gravel for a moment, watching her taillights down Birch Street, before he turned and unlocked the side door. That night, in her townhouse on Cedar Lane, Eleanor pulled up Vermont court records and searched the name Wesley Crane. There was nothing. No civil filings, no criminal records, no traffic citations. She typed Hannah Doyle, Caledonia County, 2009. The search returned an obituary and one cached news article whose original page had been pulled. Local woman dies in single-vehicle accident days before federal testimony. She read the headline 3 times before she closed the laptop. She walked into her kitchen, made a cup of decaffeinated tea she did not drink, and stood at the counter with both hands wrapped around the mug. The Caledonia County bench book was open on the breakfast table behind her. She had been on the bench 4 years and had presided over 217 criminal trials. She did not, as a rule, take work to bed. She did not sleep particularly well that night either way. By the 3rd week of September, the story had moved through Cedar Hollow the way rumors do in small towns. Holloway sat on the boards of the Methodist Church, the Regional School District, and the Caledonia Hospital Foundation. The school board called an emergency session. The hearing room was full. 3 parents Marg had known for 15 years stood up and asked, separately, whether the children were safe. Marg answered each one with the same sentence and the same level voice. The children had always been safe. 2 members of the board avoided her eyes. One of them, the vice chair, was a deacon at Holloway's church. He had received a call that morning from a number he had recognized. Marg argued for him. 17 years. No complaints. No disciplinary record, not one. The vote was 4-1. Wesley was placed on paid administrative leave, pending the outcome of the trial. He did not appeal. He cleaned out his locker, coiled the cords on his shop vacuum, and put his ring of keys on Marg's desk. She did not pick them up. I'm holding your spot. In the diner, his usual booth sat empty. Tessa filled the cup at the place setting anyway, every morning at 6:15, and threw the coffee out at 6:45. Her hands shook a little when she did it. In Burlington, Marin worked 19 hours a day. She had pulled every wire transfer from the Caledonia Children's Trust between 2006 and 2009 and run them through 3 accounting models. A pattern emerged. 31 wires totaling $4,700,000, all routed through a Delaware shell called Ashford Holdings, LLC. The registered agent was G. Holloway Jr., Gerald's son, who had died in a private plane crash in 2018. She called Lila at midnight. "Sis, the numbers match." He cleaned out the trust. On Saturday, Eleanor drove to Beach Street Books for a paperback she had been meaning to pick up. Wesley was at the front counter. He was buying a thin hardcover. The clerk was Ann Mercer, who had taught Lila in second grade and was now in her 70s. He counted out $14 in singles and a quarter, took the bag, and turned toward the door. He saw Eleanor by the cookbooks. He stopped, gave a small, polite nod. "Your Honor." "Mr. Crane." Nothing else. He walked past her with the bag held carefully, the way a man carries something he does not want to bend. She watched him go. The cash, the careful count, the cheap detergent on his coat. None of it matched a man who had pocketed $300,000. That night, Wesley sat at the kitchen table with the lights off. Junie's face was on his phone, propped against the salt shaker. She was in a study room at Middlebury, her recorder running. "He'll meet me Tuesday at the Burlington Public Library, second floor reading room. Floyd Brennan, 78. He was the internal accountant at Caledonia Trust from 2004 to 2011. Public place. Daytime. 2 exits. You sit facing the door." "Yes, Dad." At 11:47, he received an email from an address he did not recognize. The subject line was empty. The body was one line. "Stop your daughters, or they stop too." He read it once. He deleted it. He walked to the hall closet, took down a small wooden box from the top shelf, and set it on the kitchen table. Inside, under a folded oilcloth, lay a Glock 19 he had not touched in 17 years. He did not lift it. He laid his hand on the lid, sat for a long moment, and put the box back on the shelf. On the 24th of September, Wesley drove to Burlington. He met Lila in a quiet booth at a corner cafe off Church Street. He did not tell her about the email. He told her about Floyd. "Cancel the interview. Dad, he's the one piece we can't get on paper. Without him, the wires are a theory. I've buried one person over this. I'm not burying another." She was quiet. For the first time, she saw it clearly. He was not afraid of prison. He was afraid of losing one more. She agreed to back off. They redirected. They would build the case on documents alone. That same week, Eleanor filed a sua sponte disclosure with the Vermont Judicial Conduct Committee. Her late father had served as outside counsel to the Caledonia Children's Trust between 1998 and 2002, before Holloway's tenure as chairman. The committee responded within 48 hours. No conflict. He had been deceased since 2008 and had no contact with the present parties. She did not file the disclosure because of pressure. She filed it because the case was beginning to feel different than it had on paper, and she wanted her seat to be clean. She convened a brief procedural conference in chambers. Brackett came in his 3-piece. Lila came with a single legal pad. Eleanor disclosed her father's prior representation and asked whether either side wished to seek recusal. "No objection from the plaintiff," Brackett said smoothly. He was, in fact, pleased. He believed Eleanor's father's tradition would lean against a defendant of Wesley's class. "No objection from the defense," Lila said. Wesley waited in the hallway. Through the glass panel in the chamber's door, he saw Eleanor look up. Their eyes met for the second time. She held the look a half-second longer than she had at the pretrial. That Saturday, the 3 sisters came home together. They made pizza in the small kitchen on Birch Street. Wesley taught Junie how to toss the dough. She dropped it on the floor and laughed until she could not breathe. Marin laughed with her. It was the first time in the whole 9 weeks that the house held the sound of laughter. Marin picked up the framed photograph from the shelf above the radiator. It was Hannah on the day of the picnic in 2008, one summer before everything, sitting on a blanket with the 3 little girls climbing over her like puppies. "I can't quite remember her face anymore," Marin said, "but I remember her laugh." Wesley looked at the photo for a long time. "Your laugh sounds like hers." That night, after the girls had fallen asleep in the spare room, he sat alone on the back porch. He took the small white envelope Marg had given him a month before, the one he had never opened, and tore the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of an NDA she had signed in 2009. The expiration clause was circled in red ink. Effective date of release: November 11th, 2026. 4 days after the projected verdict. He laughed once, very softly, at the cold air. Marg had counted the days. The trial opened on the 5th of October. Brackett's opening was thunder. 47 transactions. A janitor with a paid-off truck and 3 children at Sacred Heart. He asked the jury to consider what kind of man steals from orphans entrusted to him. He sat down to silence and to 2 of the jurors taking notes. Lila's opening was 4 minutes long. The defense will show that every dollar moved was lawfully Mr. Crane's own, earned, saved, and spent on the children he raised. We will further show that the true source of misappropriation in this case lies elsewhere, far elsewhere. She sat. Eleanor wrote 1 word on her pad and underlined it. The next morning, Marin took the stand. She was qualified as a forensic accountant by the court. She walked the jury through the Ashford Holdings wires. $4,700,000. Brackett objected. Beyond the scope. The defendant is not charged with anything related to Ashford. Eleanor waited for a long moment. I'll allow it. Limited to establishing alternative motive. Continue, Miss Doyle. The back doors open. Floyd Brennan walked into the courtroom on a wooden cane, against everything Wesley had asked of him. He wore a wool overcoat that smelled faintly of mothballs. He approached the witness box on his own, without help. He set a leather-bound notebook on the rail. I'm Floyd Brennan. I was the internal accountant at Caledonia Children's Trust from January of 2004 through April of 2011. This is my contemporaneous ledger. I kept it for 17 years. My wife died last year. I no longer have anyone to protect with my silence. In the ledger were 31 wire transfer authorizations between 2006 and 2009. Each one bore Gerald Holloway's signature in black ink. Brackett stood and challenged Foundation. Eleanor overruled him. Brackett tried hearsay. Overruled. Best evidence rule. Overruled. Lila walked the jury through the ledger 1 transfer at a time, slowly, projecting each authorization on the courtroom screen beside the corresponding bank record from Marin's testimony. The dollar amounts matched to the cent, the dates matched to the day. By the 8th transfer, one of the jurors had stopped writing notes and was simply watching. By the 15th, the entire jury had stopped writing. Floyd took small sips of water between answers. His voice was thin but steady. He explained the internal authorization process at the trust. He explained that the wires had been routed through 3 separate correspondent banks before landing at Ashford Holding. He explained that he had raised concerns with Holloway in May of 2008 and had been told, in writing, to mind the books and not the architecture. He produced that memo as well. Wesley sat very still. He looked once at Floyd. Floyd nodded back, the smallest motion, and Wesley closed his eyes for 1 full second. Lila turned. Wesley spoke under his breath. Only to her. He didn't have to do that. He chose. Dad. After court that afternoon, Eleanor walked the corridor toward her chambers. Wesley was standing at the window at the far end. He was not blocking her path. He was simply there, looking out at the maples on the courthouse lawn. She walked past him at a measured pace. She did not speak. She did not need to. As she went by, she registered, without meaning to, the smell of cheap laundry detergent and black coffee. It was not the smell of a man who had stolen $300,000. That night, somebody cut the brake line on Floyd Brennan's rental car in the lot behind the Howard Johnson on Route 2. He never knew. At 6 the next morning, a local mechanic, hired anonymously and paid in cash, did a full pre-flight inspection on the vehicle before Floyd turned the key. Wesley never told anyone he had made that call. On the 9th of October, the 5th day of trial, the defense rested its documentary case and called its final substantive witness. The defense calls Wesley Crane to the stand. He was not required to testify. He had agreed. He took the oath. He sat. The courtroom was so quiet a chair squeaked at the back. Lila asked the first question slowly. Full name, current occupation, previous occupation. Wesley answered the third question evenly, in public, for the first time in 17 years. Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption Unit, Boston Field Office, 2007 to 2009. The gallery shifted. Eleanor tapped the gavel once. Order. Mr. Crane, Lila said, why did you leave the Bureau in November of 2009? My fiancée was killed 3 days before she was scheduled to testify in United States versus Holloway. She left behind 3 sisters. I made a choice. What was that choice? To stop being an agent. To start being whatever they needed. Brackett rose for cross-examination. He did not bother with warmth. He attacked the 312,000 line by line. Wesley answered each transaction in turn. The Ford F-150 had been paid for from $4,200 he had saved from his bureau salary in 2008. The home repairs had been covered by his janitor's wages and by Hannah's life insurance, which had named him as primary beneficiary. The tuition at Sacred Heart had been paid from the guardianship account, which was lawfully permitted under Vermont trust statute to disburse for educational purposes, and supplemented from his own paychecks every month he came up short. You expect this jury to believe you kept receipts for 17 years? I expect them to look at the receipts. Lila stood and entered into evidence 4 shoeboxes containing 2,847 dated receipts, audited the previous week by an independent partner at BDO Vermont. The auditor's certified report sat on top. Brackett had nothing. Eleanor watched Wesley through the entire cross. She gave no indication of anything. Her pen moved only to make procedural notes, but she gripped it harder than usual. She understood, with a kind of quiet finality, that the man on the stand had spent 17 years preparing for the day he would be charged with a crime he had not committed. Brackett tried one last question. Mr. Crane, isn't it true that you are testifying today only because your former wards forced your hand? Wesley looked at him steadily. The silence ran 5 full seconds. They didn't force my hand, sir. They became my hands. A juror in the second row turned her face away to wipe her eyes. Junie made a small sound and pressed her fist against her mouth. Lila did not cry. She stood very straight. Eleanor adjourned for the day. As she stepped down from the bench, she walked past the defense table on her way to chambers. She did not look at Wesley, but she set her bench book down on her own table with deliberate softness instead of the firm closing she usually used. He noticed. He did not look up. Something at the back of the courtroom had begun, very quietly, to listen. That night at her townhouse, Eleanor read the entire FBI file. Lila had entered as exhibit. She read until 3 in the morning. She did not cry. She did not sleep. On the 11th of October, the defense called its final witness, Marjorie Ann Tilden. Marg's NDA had 30 days left. She could not testify voluntarily. Lila served her in open court with a subpoena duces tecum, which under Vermont Rule of Evidence 502 superseded the civil non-disclosure. Brackett objected. Eleanor overruled. Marg took the oath. She drew a breath and let it out as if 17 years had been waiting in her chest. In November of 2009, she testified, Gerald Holloway had come to her office at the elementary school and offered her $50,000 to remain silent about the fact that Wesley Crane had resigned from the FBI to take custody of the Doyle sisters. She had accepted because Holloway had threatened to use his board influence to revoke her teaching certification. She had kept a copy of the NDA. She had also recorded the meeting. Vermont was a one-party consent state. The clerk played the tape. Holloway's voice came through the courtroom speakers, 20 years younger but unmistakable. Crane's gone quiet. We make sure he stays quiet. You make sure the school doesn't ask questions. The room broke into noise. Eleanor brought the gavel down twice. Brackett moved for a mistrial. Eleanor denied it. The evidence was lawfully obtained and properly admitted. The objection is noted. Holloway stood up in the gallery, his face purpling. This is a witch hunt. Eleanor's voice was very level. Mr. Holloway, sit down or I will hold you in contempt. This is your second warning. He sat. His tie was crooked. Lila gave her closing in 18 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She told the jury about the small house on Birch Street in November of 2009, the night Wesley had carried 3 small girls inside after the funeral. She told them about Junie at 3 years old, in the funeral home, holding his finger and asking if he would stay. She told them about the cookies in the refrigerator on Sundays. She closed. Mr. Crane was charged with stealing from us. The truth is that he gave us everything, including a way to give it back. The jury was charged at 4:18 in the afternoon and retired to deliberate. In the corridor, Wesley sat on the long oak bench outside the courtroom. He did not look at his phone. Eleanor came out of chambers at 4:35. She had no procedural reason to use that hallway. She used it anyway. She walked past him at the same measured pace as before. He looked up. Their eyes met for 3 seconds. She did not speak. She gave him a small nod. Not a greeting, not a promise, only the simple acknowledgement of a person. At 6:47, the bailiff called them back in. The foreperson stood. Her hand was steady on the verdict sheet. On all counts, we find the defendant not guilty. Junie collapsed against Marin and sobbed. Lila did not cry. She turned to Wesley. He sat for a long moment, breathing slowly, both hands flat on the defense table the way they had been on the first day. Then he stood. He walked to the row where the 3 of them were standing and pulled all 3 into his arms at once. And for the first time in 17 years, he wept, quietly, his face turned into Junie's hair so that no one in the gallery could see. By 9 the next morning, the FBI Boston field office had reopened case number 09CR3318. Gerald Holloway was arrested at his home on Lake Caspian Road at 9:14 on charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and, after a renewed forensic review of the 2009 accident report, conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Hannah Doyle. The local paper ran the story under a single-column headline below the fold. By the afternoon, the wire services had picked it up. By the evening, a Boston news truck had parked across from the school. Wesley closed the blinds in the principal's outer office where he was standing when he saw it, and went back to refilling the soap dispensers in the boys' restroom on the second floor. He did not give an interview. He did not return the messages from the Burlington Free Press or from a producer at 60 Minutes who left her cell number with Marg twice. The Caledonia Children's Trust Foundation was placed under emergency state receivership. Of the $4,700,000 traced to Ashford Holdings, an estimated $1.2 million was apportioned to the 3 Doyle sisters as restitution. Lila refused her share. She drafted, instead, the founding documents for a new nonprofit. The Hannah Doyle Memorial Trust would serve children of Vermont who had been failed by the previous foundation. Marin took the first audit position pro bono. Junie agreed to write the first-year annual report. The school board reconvened on a Wednesday and voted 5-0 to reinstate Wesley with a public apology. He declined the apology. He asked only to keep his original ring of keys instead of being issued a new one. Marg slid the old set across the desk to him without ceremony, and he clipped it to his belt the way he had every workday for 17 years. A week after the verdict, on a Saturday, Eleanor walked back into Beach Street Books. She had no judicial reason to see Wesley anymore. The case was closed. He was at the children's shelf. He had another thin hardcover in his hand. She stopped 2 steps away. "Mr. Crane." He looked up. "Just Wesley, Your Honor. Case is closed." She allowed a small smile, the first one she had given anywhere in this story. Eleanor, then. They talked for 4 minutes about the book, which was Frog and Toad. They did not mention the trial. They did not mention Holloway. "Lila read this one when she was 8, he said. "She used to read it out loud to the other 2 while I made supper. My niece is 6. Same series." That was the whole conversation. They did not exchange numbers. They did not promise anything. When Eleanor crossed the street outside the shop, she glanced back without meaning to. Wesley was standing inside the front window holding the bag. He was not waving. He was looking. That night in the kitchen on Birch Street, Lila sat across from him over a cooling mug. "What will you do now, Dad?" "Go back to the school. Fix the water fountains. Same as before. You never think about yourself, do you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I did. Today I did." She did not press him. She smiled. A cold front moved into Cedar Hollow that week. Wesley stood on the porch at 6 in the morning with a mug of coffee. On the small shelf inside the front window was the Frog and Toad book, still in its paper bag, unopened. By the 15th of November, the first real snow had come. Wesley walked to school through 3 inches of it. The schoolyard was white and quiet. He shoveled the front walk. A cluster of second graders ran past him on the way to the door. "Mr. Crane, snowball fight after school? Maybe. Not at me, though." Marg met him at the front entrance with a paper cup of coffee. Mail came. From Lila. He opened the envelope on the bench by the radiator. Inside was a photograph of a new banner being hung over the door of a small building in Burlington, Hannah Doyle Memorial Trust. Grand opening the following weekend. Lila had written one line in pencil on the back. Wear the blue flannel. It was her favorite color. That Saturday, the three sisters came home. They made potato soup from Hannah's old handwritten recipe. Junie set the framed photograph on the table between the salt and the pepper. Hannah and the three little girls on the picnic blanket. For the first time in years, Wesley did not turn his face away when he sat down. Marin slid a small white envelope across to him. Annual physical. I scheduled it for you. Your heart's fine. The doctor said you need to sleep more. He laughed, very lightly. Yes, ma'am. On Sunday morning, he walked to the Maple Diner. Eleanor was at the window booth, alone, with a paperback open on the table. She did not come there often. She looked up. She gave him a small nod. He went to the counter. Tessa lifted the coffee pot. The usual, Wes? 2 cups? 1 black? 1 latte? 2 sugars. Her eyebrows went up. He did not explain. He carried both cups to the booth. He set the latte down across from her. At the bookstore the other day, I thought you said you took it that way. She did not remember saying so. He might have noticed how she had ordered at the counter that afternoon. He might have only guessed. Sit, she said. He sat. They did not speak much. Snow drifted past the window in slow vertical lines. Outside, a salt truck went by on Birch Street, beeping once at the corner. After 4 minutes of silence, Eleanor said, I read Frog and Toad last week with my niece. She liked the chapter called The Letter. Lila liked that one best, too. She liked the part about waiting for the mail. They did not promise to meet again. They did not exchange numbers. At 9:43, she glanced at her watch. She had something at 10. Thanks for the coffee. Thank you, he said. For sitting down, she buttoned her coat at the door. Tessa, polishing the counter, watched Wesley out of the corner of her eye and let a small smile lift the side of her mouth. Wesley did not turn to watch Eleanor leave. He looked down at his black coffee. It was still hot. For the first time in 17 years, he did not drink it down quickly to get to work. He let it stay warm a while longer. Some justice arrives by the strike of a gavel. Some arrives by the soft fall of snow. Wesley Crane had waited for both, and after 17 years, he was no longer waiting alone.